They laughed when he said it. Both of them. The one in the black jacket at the front gate and the one on the radio who confirmed the instruction. Not the cruel kind of laugh. Worse, the dismissive kind. The kind that doesn't even register you as worth cruelty. The security guard at the Whitmore estate gate looked at the man standing in the rain on a Tuesday evening in November. Flannel shirt, work boots, a manila envelope held carefully to keep the contents dry, and said into his radio, "Guy at the front gate says he's the daughter's father." There was a pause. Then the voice on the radio said something, and the security guard relayed it without inflection. "Miss Whitmore says she has no idea who you are and requests you leave the property." The man did not leave the property. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was 37 years old. He was standing in the rain outside an 8,000 square foot house in the kind of neighborhood where the gates had cameras and the cameras had backup cameras, holding an envelope that contained a document he had waited 4 months to receive, and that he had driven 2 hours in November rain to deliver in person, because some things you do not send by certified mail. In the envelope was a DNA paternity test result. The result was 99.998%. The daughter's name was Gracie. She was 6 years old. She was inside that house. He had never met her. What the security guard didn't know, what neither of the two men standing between Daniel and that gate fully understood, was that the woman who had told them to send him away was about to have the longest conversation of her life. That the document in that envelope was not a threat or a demand or a scheme. It was a fact, and facts, in Daniel's experience, were the kind of thing that eventually got through a gate whether the gate wanted them to or not. What Whitmore Holdings board member and family attorney Warren Geld didn't know. Warren, who had spent 11 months advising Victoria Whitmore on exactly this situation, and who had told her, repeatedly and with great professional confidence, that the man would go away if the gate stayed closed long enough, was that by Friday he would be filing paperwork he had specifically told his client she would never need to file. What Victoria Whitmore didn't know, sitting in her living room watching the gate camera feed on her phone while the man in the flannel shirt stood in the rain and did not leave, was that the thing she'd been managing for 11 months was not manageable anymore. That the rain-soaked man at her gate was not the problem. That the problem was the document he was holding. That Gracie, who was 6, who liked orange things and had a stuffed elephant named Gerald, and who asked questions the way some children breathe, continuously and without apparent effort, had a father, and that the father was standing in the rain refusing to leave. Victoria Whitmore had known this was possible. She had not fully allowed herself to believe it would become actual. Daniel had been up at 5:45. He did not have a child living with him. He had a 2-bedroom apartment where the second bedroom had a bed in it and a shelf he'd built himself, and a small collection of orange things he'd been quietly accumulating for 11 months, ever since he'd learned from a mutual contact that Gracie's favorite color was orange. He didn't know if this was still true. Children changed. He didn't know what was still true. He knew almost nothing about his daughter except what could be learned from the outside of a life, which was very little and also, for 11 months, everything he had. He made his own breakfast. Coffee, toast. He worked as a plumber, licensed 15 years. His own small business with 2 employees who he treated well and who treated the work the same way he did, which was carefully and on time. He made a decent living. He had good hands. He had a sister named Rosaria who had told him, when he'd found out about Gracie 7 months into not knowing she existed, that she would help him with whatever came next, and who had meant it, and who he'd called at midnight on 4 separate occasions, when the waiting became the kind of thing you couldn't hold alone. He'd found out about Gracie through a friend of a friend. the way these things sometimes surface. A conversation that wasn't meant to reach him. A name mentioned to the wrong person. A timeline that someone who knew both of them had eventually added up and said something about. He'd contacted Victoria Whitmore through a lawyer. Victoria's lawyer had responded. The exchange between the two attorneys had taken 4 months and produced, finally, an agreement to conduct a paternity test through a neutral laboratory. Daniel had provided his sample the same morning the agreement was signed. He'd driven to the lab himself. The result had arrived by courier that morning. He'd read it at his kitchen table. He'd sat there for 22 minutes. Then he'd called Rosaria. She'd said, "Go. Right now. Go." He'd showered. He'd driven 2 hours in November rain to stand at a gate that wouldn't open. He was still standing there at 7:15 when the intercom crackled. "Mr. Reyes," Victoria Whitmore's voice. Not through a relay this time. Direct. "Warren is calling me every 3 minutes. He says I should send you away and let the attorneys handle it." "Are you going to?" Daniel said. A pause. Long enough to mean something. "I'm going to open the gate," Victoria said. "Warren is going to be very angry. Come in before I change my mind." The gate opened. He walked up the driveway in the rain, holding the envelope against his chest. The house was lit from inside, warm against the November dark. He stood at the front door. Victoria Whitmore opened it before he could knock. She was 43. She had the look of someone who had been running things alone for a long time and was very good at it, and also very tired. She looked at Daniel the way people look at something they've been trying not to look at directly for 11 months. She looked at his face. She looked for something in it and found, apparently, enough of something. "Come in," she said. He came in. They sat at her kitchen table, not the formal rooms, the kitchen, which was where she'd clearly been when he arrived. Coffee mug, a child's drawing on the table, weighted down by a small ceramic elephant. Daniel looked at the elephant. His throat did something he managed. He put the envelope on the table between them. "I know what it says," Victoria said. "I know you do. Warren says the legal process from here takes—" "I don't want to talk about the legal process," Daniel said. His voice was level. "I want to talk about Gracie." Victoria was quiet. "I have not filed anything that would take her away from you," Daniel said. "I have not made any demand about custody or visitation that your lawyer didn't first suggest as an option. I have not contacted anyone outside of the legal process. I have done everything the way it was supposed to be done." He looked at the envelope. "I drove 2 hours in the rain because I needed you to see that I'm a person. Not a threat. Not a legal document. A person." Victoria looked at the ceramic elephant for a moment. "She made that at school," she said. "She makes things constantly. The teachers say She stopped. Started again. She asks where her father is. Said it simply, factually, like something she'd been carrying and was carefully setting down since she was 4. I told her I didn't know. Because I didn't know." She looked at Daniel. "I know that's not. I know how that sounds. How did you not know?" He asked it without heat. He needed to understand. Victoria looked at her hands. "I knew there was a possibility. I didn't pursue certainty because I thought certainty would be." She stopped. "I thought it would be complicated." He looked at her for a long moment. "It is complicated," he said. "It's the most complicated thing I've ever been in. I'm still here." She looked up at him. This was the moment the story turned. Not loud. Not with witnesses. Just 2 people at a kitchen table in the rain, with a ceramic elephant between them and a document that had already said everything it needed to say. She's asleep, Victoria said. She goes to bed at 8. I know I can't meet her tonight, Daniel said. I'm not asking for that. What are you asking for? He thought about the second bedroom, the shelf he'd built, the collection of orange things on it. He thought about Rosaria saying, "Go. Right now. Go." He thought about 22 minutes at a kitchen table that morning, reading a number that changed everything and confirmed what he'd already known. I'm asking for a beginning, he said. Whatever that looks like. A beginning. Victoria looked at the envelope on the table. She looked at the ceramic elephant. She looked at the man across from her who had driven 2 hours in the rain and stood at a gate that wouldn't open and was still here and was talking about a beginning. Warren is going to tell me this is a mistake, she said. What do you think? She picked up the ceramic elephant, turned it over in her hands once, set it back down. I think Gracie asked me last week if Father's come back, she said. I didn't know what to tell her. Daniel's hands were very still on the table. Tell her yes, he said quietly. Tell her yes, they do. Now, about Warren Geld. Warren Geld filed the paperwork on Friday. He filed it correctly and professionally, because Warren was good at his job even when his job required him to do things he had previously told his client she would not need to do. He did not apologize for the 11 months of strategic delay he had recommended. He billed his hours and submitted them and moved to the next matter on his desk. He was not a person who performed guilt. He was a person who performed competence. And competence, in this particular matter, now meant filing the documents that established Daniel Reyes's parental rights clearly and legally, and without further obstruction. He did send Victoria a brief email on Friday afternoon, noting that the process had proceeded as orderly as the circumstances allowed. Victoria read it once and did not respond. Some correspondence closes itself. Victoria called her sister Pauline that weekend. The call lasted an hour and a half. Victoria's sister Pauline had told her 11 months ago that the situation needed to be handled differently, and had been told that was not helpful. Pauline did not say, "I told you so." She said, "What do you need?" Victoria said she needed someone to be there for the first meeting when Daniel met Gracie for the first time. She wanted someone she trusted in the room. Pauline said, "Tell me when." The first meeting was a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks later, at a park equidistant between their two locations. Daniel arrived early. He sat on a bench. He was wearing the same flannel shirt, because it was the shirt he'd been wearing when he decided to stop waiting, and he'd thought about that, and decided it mattered. Victoria arrived with Gracie and Pauline. Gracie was 6. She was wearing an orange rain jacket, even though it wasn't raining, and she was holding Gerald the elephant, and she walked slightly ahead of her mother the way children walk, when they are curious about what's coming, and their legs have moved before the decision was fully made. She stopped in front of Daniel. He sat very still on the bench. At her eye level, sitting, he'd thought about this. He'd thought about every detail of this for 3 weeks, and he still had no idea what to say, which was the honest condition of the moment. Gracie looked at him with the direct, undefended evaluation of a 6-year-old. "Are you my dad?" she said. He said, "Yes." She considered this. She looked at Gerald. She looked back at Daniel. "Gerald is an elephant," she said. "He's been with me since I was a baby." "He looks like he's done a good job," Daniel said. She looked at Gerald again, assessing this statement for accuracy. Apparently, she found it satisfactory. She sat down on the bench next to Daniel. Not close, but next to. The way you sit next to someone you've decided to give a chance to. "My favorite color is orange," she said. He had to look away for a second. Just 1 second. When he looked back, she was watching him with the specific patience of someone who is used to adults needing a moment. "Mine too," he said. "I'm still deciding, but probably orange." She thought about this. "You can decide later," she said. "You don't have to know everything right away." He looked at her. "That's what Mom says," Gracie added. He looked at Victoria, standing a few feet away with Pauline watching. Victoria gave him the smallest nod. The one that meant she'd heard Gracie say it, and she agreed, and she was sorry it took this long, and they could figure out the rest. He nodded back. Gracie was already telling him about Gerald's full history, which was detailed, and which she delivered with the conviction of someone whose knowledge of Gerald's biography was authoritative and complete. He listened to the whole thing. He was very good at listening. He had been practicing in a way for 11 months. 3 months later, the second bedroom in Daniel's apartment had been repainted. Orange, not a pale orange, an actual orange, the color Gracie had pointed to at the hardware store when he'd asked her on their 4th visit what she thought. She'd pointed without hesitation. He'd bought 2 gallons. They'd painted it together on a Saturday, and she'd painted a stripe that went somewhat diagonally across the lower section of the wall that he had decided to leave exactly as it was. Gerald the elephant was on the shelf, not permanently. Gracie took him back and forth, because Gerald went where Gracie went, which was a rule she had established, and which Daniel considered non-negotiable and correct. But Gerald had been on the shelf during visits long enough that there was a specific elephant-shaped dust-free zone on the shelf that Daniel did not clean. Because it meant something. Warren Geld had filed 2 more documents. The visitation schedule was established. The terms were generous on both sides, because Victoria and Daniel had negotiated them directly, without attorneys in the room, over 2 phone calls that had been uncomfortable and productive in equal measure. Pauline had sat with Victoria through both calls. Rosaria had sat with Daniel. Victoria had sent Daniel a photograph by text on a Wednesday. Gracie at school, in the orange rain jacket, holding a drawing she'd made of 4 figures. She'd labeled them in her own handwriting, Mom, Pauline, Gerald, and at the end, slightly apart but clearly included, 1 more figure. Dad. Daniel looked at that photograph for a long time. He put his phone down. He went to the second bedroom. He looked at the diagonal stripe across the lower section of the orange wall. He thought about the bench at the park. About you don't have to know everything right away. About an elephant named Gerald, who had been doing a good job since she was a baby. He went back to the kitchen, made coffee, stood at the window the way he stood at the window in the mornings, doing the inventory that had changed shape over 11 months, from grief to waiting to this, something he didn't have a word for yet that was adjacent to full. He'd find a word for it eventually. He had time. If this one reached you, leave something in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about the fathers who keep standing at the gate until it opens, subscribe. They deserve to be seen.